casting down imagination, casting down imagination. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds.
Revelation chapter 12, part 1. The Woman and the Dragon. Basic and General Study of Revelation compiled by Gaetan, read by Steve Gilb. Verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Verse 2. And she being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pained to be delivered. Verse 3. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. Daniel 7, verses 7 and 24, and Revelation 13:1. We will explain the symbolism of the heads, horns, and crowns later in chapter 13. Verse 4. And his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Verse 5. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with the rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. Now here's a good place to pause for a moment while we begin to understand the passage which we have just read. Likely, as you read this 5th verse, you begin to catch on who this was and who this child was. That's the key. That's the clue to who the woman is. For she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with the rod of iron. Now this is something which the scripture says about Jesus several times, that he is going to come someday and rule the world, rule all nations, even rule over the wicked who refuse to love and obey him voluntarily. He's going to rule them with the rod of iron by force. Psalm 2:9. Thou shalt break them with the rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Revelation 2:27. And he, Christ, shall rule them with the rod of iron, as the vessels of a potter shall they be broken to shivers, even as I received of my Father. See also Revelation 19, verse 15. These passages are talking directly about Jesus. You say, then I know who his mother is. It was Mary. The literal fulfillment happened when Mary was used by God to bring forth Jesus, the man-child. Immediately after his birth, the dragon, or devil, through King Herod, tried to devour him by ordering the slaughter of all children under 2 years old. Matthew 2:16. And Jesus has been caught up to God's throne to rule all nations. Mark 16:19. Then after the Lord had spoken unto them, he was received up into heaven, and sat on the right hand of God. Also see Acts 1:9. But things get a bit confusing with this interpretation when in the next verse we read, And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Revelation 12:6. The Bible refers to the second half of the Antichrist's 7-year reign as the Great Tribulation. It even tells us several times how long this tribulation period will last, using several different terms. 3.5 years, 42 months, or 1,260 days. If these 1,260 days when the woman flees into the wilderness are the tribulation period, which it seems they are, then the identity of this woman must have also a figurative interpretation. If the woman symbolizes some greater figure than just Mary herself, who could that be? Some say, Well, of course it was the nation of Israel. That's the woman. And the 12 stars in her crown, of course, are the 12 greatest patriarchs or the 12 apostles. It was, after all, the great nation of Israel, typified by a woman, who brought forth Jesus. We think it goes far beyond just the Jewish nation of Israel, whom God rejected and replaced with the followers of Christ. Since this chapter is dealing with the end time, then the woman, in her ultimate fulfillment, must represent the ultimate body of believers, the vast company of Christ's followers who will carry on during this last period of tribulation and persecution. And not only that, she represents the entire complete church of Jesus Christ from the beginning to the end, from the Garden of Eden to the Revelation, from the beginning to the end, all those who are true believers, who love God, followers of Christ, all those who are married to the bridegroom from the Garden of Eden to the Revelation. She is the bride of Christ himself, wife of the King of Kings. No other woman could be so glorious, shining like the sun, with the moon under her feet and 12 stars in her crown. Isaiah 54:5. For thy Maker is thine husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. The God of the whole earth shall he be called. Hosea 2:19 and 20. And I will betroth thee unto me forever, yea, I will betroth thee unto me in righteousness and in judgment and in loving kindness and in mercies. I will even betroth thee unto me in faithfulness, and thou shalt know the Lord. Ephesians 5:25. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. Revelation 19:7. Let us be glad and rejoice, and give honor to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife hath made herself ready. The stars in her crown, well, we can only theorize because it doesn't say who they are. We don't really know. But we believe they're probably going to be the 12 most important leaders of the church that God has ever known. Or you may say they're actual angels. They could be the 12 angels of the church because stars are frequently used interchangeably in the Word of God as a name for angels. The mystery of the 7 stars, which thou sawest in my right hand. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. Revelation 1:20. Who is the dragon? Revelation 12:9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Satan was God's own archangel. Lucifer, the light-bearer, he was an archangel of God. But apparently God gave the angels free will. God even allowed division to come between the angels. They have choice. They were given choice, free will, and Satan rebelled against God. He wasn't satisfied with being God's right-hand man. He wasn't satisfied with being next to God. He wanted to be God, so God had to demote him. And ever since then, he's still trying to be God, run the world, and rule over humanity. And if he can't rule, he'll do his best to ruin the world and human society. And how many of the angels have followed him? 1/3. It says so right here in verse 4. 1/3 of the angels rebelled along with Satan. Think of that. God gave them their choice, and they fell along with Satan. Revelation 12:6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. This verse proves that this woman, or church, is living in the end time. Just as specifically as it could possibly be, there is your 3.5 years of tribulation again. And there, in places of refuge, she will be miraculously fed and cared for during that entire 3.5 years. Others of his children will boldly witness and preach and prophesy against the Antichrist, miraculously empowered and protected by God. Revelations 11:2 and 3. And the holy city shall be tread under foot 42 months. And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Where in the world do you think the Lord is going to hide us when he says, in the wilderness? Where is this wilderness? What forest is deep enough? What jungle is deep enough to hide us Christians and to help the church survive during the tribulation period? He's not just talking about jungles, forests, or deserts. He's talking about the wilderness of this whole world. There are going to be whole nations who rebel against the Antichrist, and whole religions, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, and others. There will be hundreds of millions who are going to refuse to worship the Antichrist or take his mark or fall down and worship his idol. Whole nations who are going to fight wars against him as indicated in portions of Daniel 11. There will be lots of countries who don't like the Antichrist, who will sympathize with us, hide us, and take care of us. Revelation 12:7. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. Daniel 12:1. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time the people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. What spiritual powers are there besides the one true God? Well, there are spiritual powers and principalities who dwell in spiritual realms, kings, princes, and powers, spiritual powers. Who are they? Angels, both good and evil. Michael is like a god. Who is the one that announced to Mary that she would give birth to the Messiah? Gabriel. He is also an archangel. Even Satan himself is like a god, and his archangels are like little gods. They are spiritual gods, spelled with a little g. Nothing like our God, of course. The God, the Father. There is only one God in that sense. Only one supreme God, one supreme being. But there are many lesser spiritual powers, dominions and principalities, princes and rulers, spoken of all through the Bible. There were princes of different countries, demonic princes, spiritual rulers over countries who wrestled with the angels of God and tried to prevent the work of God. It's all in the Bible. Read about it in passages like these. Daniel chapter 8, verse 16, chapter 9, verse 21, chapter 10, verses 12, 13, and 21, chapter 12, verse 1, Luke chapter 1, verses 19 through 26, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, and Jude, verse 9. Revelation 12:8. And prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. Verse 9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Several scriptures allude to what the dragon is doing in the earth and to this great event of his stunning defeat. John chapter 12, verse 31. Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. Luke 10:18. And he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. John 8:44. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. 2 Thessalonians 2, 9 and 10. Even him whose coming is after the work of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. Revelation chapter 20, 7, 8, and 10. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. Revelation 12:10. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation, and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. A scene similar to this is described in Zechariah 3:1. And he showed me Joshua the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist or accuse him. The scriptures teach that Satan and his followers fell from their first estate or position at the beginning of creation. For how the devil fell, see Ezekiel chapter 28 and Isaiah chapter 14. However, Satan still continued to have access to heaven and the Lord's throne. In the book of Job, written a couple of 1,000 years after creation, we read, The sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. He then began to accuse Job to the Lord like a prosecuting attorney. See Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 11. Don't worry. If you are saved, then Jesus is your defense attorney. Although Satan is in rebellion against God, he still appears before him in the courts of heaven, accusing the saints day and night. But now, at the very end, he finally gets the boot, and he's cast out of heaven to the earth. He comes down and possesses and empowers the Antichrist, who will then become the devil in the flesh, accusing the saints face to face and making war against them. To be continued in the second part of this chapter 12. Designed, compiled, and edited by Gaetan from multiple sources. Read by Steve Gilb. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, comment on it, share it on social media, and subscribe to the channel. God bless you.
God to the pulling down of strongholds. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. Casting down imaginations, casting down imaginations, and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ.